Hey, it's Tim and Lisa, and you're listening to the REI Concierge podcast. The REI Concierge helps Americans living abroad find and buy great investment properties in the U.S. From analyzing markets to finding local partners to closing your first deal, we are partnered with you every step of the way. Let's jump into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the REI Concierge podcast with Tim and Lisa. I am so excited with our guest today, Stephanie Wankel. So I have to tell a little story. I was first introduced to Stephanie through Tanya Salseth, who has been on the podcast. And when I first reached out to Tanya, she's like, hey, I was on this podcast. You can listen to this to learn a little bit about me before we talk. And it was a podcast called Frenzied to Financial Freedom, which is Stephanie's podcast, spoiler alert. So that's the first time that I was introduced to Stephanie. And then Tanya was like, hey, you might be a great guest for Stephanie's podcast. Let me introduce you. So Tanya introduces me to Stephanie. Stephanie's like, cool, you want to be on the podcast? So I was a guest on the Frenzied to Financial Freedom podcast with Stephanie. And now Stephanie is a guest on our podcast. And what a cool circle of events and a network of connections. And Tanya's been on our podcast. And Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And yes, Tanya's a great friend of mine. And this podcast world is a lot like the real estate world where, it takes a team to make the dream. So it just works that way.
Yes. And I didn't even, with all of my whole story, I didn't actually introduce you or say who you are. So Stephanie Wankel is our guest today. Stephanie, maybe I should qualify that we are recording this at 6 a.m. my time, just in case I sound a little off.
Yeah, we're going
just keeping it loose, keeping it real. I love it.
Stephanie is a real estate investor who lives in Denver, Colorado, and her company is called the New Heights Investment Group. And she is way more than a real estate investor. Stephanie, we're so excited to jump into your story and learn so much.
Awesome. I'm excited too. This will be fun.
Stephanie, so Lisa obviously knows a lot more about your story than I do. I just got bits and pieces from talking with Lisa and then listening to your podcast and obviously talking to you before we actually hit record here tonight, this morning, this afternoon, wherever, depending on where you are. So I'm stoked. I'm stoked to hear about all these different branches of business you have going on, how real estate investing has played a huge role in that and continues to, but also just your philosophy of multiple streams of income, because that's something I've always been, super intrigued by and now kind of live my life by financially anyways. And I think that, I think that'll be really helpful for our listeners to know that real estate investing is probably the biggest part of what all three of us do, but there's other things you can do too. So if you don't have that 40 grand for a down payment, 30 grand for a down payment, 100 grand for a syndication, like there's other options to explore. Don't put all your eggs in chickens. No, eggs.
I think it's
eggs in one basket. You don't put chickens in the basket.
We could put chickens in there. Yeah.
That'd be weird. So let's stick with the eggs. You don't put all your eggs in one basket. You want to put them in multiple baskets. The analogy is running out of steam, but you know what I mean. We got to keep the multiple streams of income going. So I want to hear your philosophy on that. But let's get started with who you are. Lisa said a little bit about how we met you, and you guys have done some work together. So why don't you just start where you want to start?
Sure. So I actually have a W-2 career in product development in the software industry for 25 years. So I've been in that space. I know a lot of times real estate investors, either have jobs or looking to side hustle real estate or move or whatnot. So that piece of information is sometimes helpful. I actually still do my W-2 job. I love it. I have two kids one that just finished college with a big student loan and one that's in college with student loans. So for me, you'll hear through my story, I like to compile cash, mostly to invest because it's a passion and a love. And a W-2 is an easy way to get financing and, a paycheck. So I haven't yet gotten rid of that. So So that is kind of my day job. How I got started in real estate investing is I grew up with a grandmother who had several duplexes, and she in Boulder, Colorado, which is a college town here, and she basically did student housing. I didn't know what that was, but she rented to students, and the only thing I noticed was that like rent checks came in, and something about it seemed like, wow, that's interesting. We never once talked about real estate investing ever. But I caught an unconscious bug to be a real estate investor. And so I would, anytime I would talk to people, I would be like, I'm going to buy a rental house. And that was just my thing. And then 2008 came, and voila, lots of rental houses, right? And people always are like, you're so lucky. I'm like, really? Because it was pretty scary, to be honest. Like, if you're in the middle of the thing, you're not like, I'm going to get some great deals. You're like, no one's touching houses. Like, why would I touch houses? But I had put the word out there, and a local wholesaler had contacted me and was like, I have these 2 rentals. They're $65,000. And I was like, okay, well, I can't do that because I had just gotten divorced. I was newly divorced. My kids were 5 and 8, and I was single parenting them on my own. So I had literally just lost half my asset, half my income, and doubled my parenting duty. So I was like, this isn't, to myself, I'm thinking this isn't a great time to take this huge risk and invest in real estate. And I was like, I'm doing this thing. I said I wanted to be a landlord. That is not what I wanted to be, just to be clear. But that is what I became. And so I bought these 2 houses. I knew enough to know the math of the mortgage and the expenses versus the income. So I knew enough to be like, okay, that's giving me extra money, which they call cash flow, right? Extra money every month. And so this maybe won't be as scary. What I didn't do is budget for vacancy and expend CapEx expenditures and all the stuff that, real estate investors know to do. So I was jumping in with half blind. I don't think bigger pockets was a thing. I didn't read books. I just did it.
I love that. I didn't read, I didn't prepare. I just said, yes, let's go.
I did.
That's awesome. And somehow it worked out.
Yeah, not without a lot of pain, right? Like I literally was a landlord for years, and that became my second job. Like I just bought myself a second job, and it was landlording. And if for $65,000, even in 2008, you can imagine, not probably the best property. I would call it a low CD market, which in the real estate investing world is not good. Scary as a single woman chasing rent. It was rough. It was rough. But I'm still here to talk about it. That's so my main message from the early part of my story is, if I could do that when I did, anybody can, right? Like I talk to people that say they want to invest in real estate all the time, but they have reasons they can't. And I just feel like, yeah, you can. And the best time to do it is, yesterday, but since you're at today, do it now is my message on that.
I love that. I love that. There's so much there, Stephanie. And I just want to, before we move on, I just want to highlight one thing that really stood out to me is your grandma and the influence that she had on you, even though she never talked to you about real estate investing. And
yeah,
there's something about that is so cool to me. And, like that intergenerational influence in a really positive way that she didn't even realize that she would influence you and open you up to this idea. I love that.
Yeah, we're all leaders, whether you know it or not, right? So people are watching you, what you're doing, not just what you're saying, and for good or for bad, and in your family and not in your family. So yeah, Yeah, she was she had courage, now knowing, obviously, on the other side. Um, and to be quite frank, those rents paid her life, like they paid her bills. And every one of her 6 kids lived in one of those houses at some point in time. And so, yeah, it's a great illustration of what real estate can do for you.
That's super interesting, Stephanie. I want to unpack that a little more. I hate the phrase unpack. Lisa, if I start saying that on the podcast, please just call me out. We'll edit it.
We'll
I want to go
unpack it,
into that a
Tim.
little bit more. It's a lot to unpack there. I hate it so much. I'm sorry. I apologize to everybody. I find that fascinating because it's almost like, so I always, everyone goes back to the cliche, rich dad, poor dad. But there was something like when I first read that and I was like, oh, you know what I mean? Like I always knew there was something that successful people were doing that just no one was telling me about. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't just they were saving their money and spending it wisely and saving more than they made. Sure, that's part of it. But like the really successful people that just didn't feel like they were stressed and had to work all the time did something else. And that thing turned out to be real estate, period. So it's similar to that with like your grandmother who just, she didn't talk about it, but you're like, something's different about grandma. Like I see the way she
Yeah.
lives her life and how she provides for her children, puts all her kids in her houses. She owns it. She collects rent. There's something about her and like her fearlessness. And that happened to be real estate. And I just find that fascinating because you don't always have to like directly say, now listen, Stephanie,
Yeah.
when you get older, buy a duplex and then rent out one
Right.
side. It's not like
House
that. You just
hack.
saw it. Yeah. And like, I love what you said about, we're all leaders, even if we don't, would you say we're all leaders, even if we don't know it?
We're all leaders, whether we know it or not, right?
Whether we
Like
know it
you're
or not. Yeah.
leading it in some way.
So she was totally giving you an example of like how, she became financially free and
Yeah.
just found that kind of independence and strength. And it just kind of like through osmosis, you were like that, there's something about grandma. And like, you found that to be real estate investing. So I just
Yeah.
wanted to like, I don't know. I think that's super cool because I think there's something in a lot of us entrepreneurs and real estate investors that as we work W-2 jobs and, put in all these hours and stuff and have these student loans, et cetera, we get to a point where we're like, I'm not doing something right. Like there's
Yeah.
something here that successful people do that we're not doing until we find out that you can buy real estate and make money off it. Like at least that for me, I'll speak for myself, but I think there's a lot of that in all of us. And like, she just kind of illuminated that for you. So I don't know. I just wanted to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, and we actually never ever did talk about. She has no idea. She passed away before I bought rental property. So, you also don't know what legacy you're leaving, right? You might never come to realize.
That's really cool. So I want to know what happened next. You bought these 2 houses. You're landlording.
Yeah.
It's scary. It's scary neighborhoods. You're still like single mom and kind of, I would imagine, putting your life back together. Like what happened next?
So I purchased these 2 rentals, and then I don't know if people remember financing back in 2008, but they would like let you loan, but before they cracked down on it.
Yes.
The same wholesaler came to me. He's like, here's another property. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to get 50 loans, and they let you get 120% of your equity out of the things like you just barely owned. Anyway, I did all that and bought a 3rd property. And so basically I put a Section 8 renter in there, which is a whole learning, all these various tenant types. And I basically managed landlord those 3 for like 6 years. And what you should do is like have a bigger plan and like work your plan. And instead I was like, I got these 3 things and I'm busy with my people, and let's just keep this going. And so I landlorded, and I learned if anyone ever wants to talk to me about buying a rental, and I have stories about bed bugs, about roaches, about scary people, and all kinds of things. So
we'll have you back for the Halloween special.
the bloopers or something. And so I bought those, and as happens, equity happens, appreciation happens, and those houses went up in value. And at some point then I decided to take my capital out of this Denver market. Well, actually, excuse me, no, I didn't. First, I decided to get out of those neighborhoods because it was very fatiguing, all this chasing rent and scary stories. So I moved that capital into some other like A neighborhoods. I did 2 Airbnbs, one in Keystone, which is a ski resort, and one for corporate rental in downtown Denver. So I took the equity from those and did different things in the Colorado area. Which I still was managing, but managing a short-term rental is actually so much easier than managing a rental house. You don't have to evict people. I evicted a lot of people. You don't have to, you're booking the arrangement online. Like there's a whole sales pitch I would give someone to look into short-term rentals. Also, it allowed us to have vacation homes in the mountains. So when we weren't renting out our ski resort, our ski condo, the kids and I would go there. And so a lot of memories. It was a lot of good things came out of kind of that period of that next step in real estate investing.
Can you go into it a little bit more? I've never heard anyone say that short-term rentals are easier to manage than long-term rentals. Do you think that, and I'm curious, do you think that's because of the C and D neighborhoods you were managing in? Or would you say that for like someone in a B and C or an A neighborhood? Because there's just so much turnover, right? Is that because, do you use like one of those short-term rental property management companies?
I used part of one. I used a local property manager who managed the cleaning and who managed like customer in-town visit calls. So if someone's like, my shower doesn't work, they got the repair person. But I did all of the bookings and managing because it's just super easy on Airbnb and VRBO.
Yeah.
Couldn't be easier. They both have pros and cons. For me, I'm sure part of it was, being in the neighborhoods I had a lot of evictions and it was challenging. But even today, I just think it's easier. People are on vacation. You don't literally ever have to talk to them hardly. You're doing an online transaction back and forth. If you're not in an area that's like partying and that kind of thing, they, for the most part, are there. They lightly use all of your stuff and then they leave. Yeah. To me, it's just a lot easier, and I like it better. But that part of that could be, personal preference also.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because it's something I'm interested in. I'm terrified of like having to arrange all of the moving pieces, and that's just me personally. Like, they stay there for 3 days. Like, it's just so many logistics, which I'm not good at.
The software does it all for you, to be honest. It does it all for you. And then also the benefit of getting to use them also has a perk to it.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah.
But the thing I say to people that are looking at that is that when you're acquiring a property, you still need to acquire on the fundamentals. That needs to financially make sense with a long-term renter, because short-term rental laws change and they're all over the place. I was in my condo in Denver and they just stopped allowing it. And so I had to pivot to long-term there, like overnight. And so you're going to make more money short-term. And so you need to make sure that your numbers work for long-term because you may have to pivot at some point.
That is very good advice.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Stephanie. I want to dig in there for just 1 second. Do you want to unpack that, Tim? I want to unpack that a little bit more. I'm only going to use unpack on this episode since we're so deep in now. But you said you had to pivot and go long term, and you made it sound very easy. Like, can you just explain? It can't be that easy. Like, explain how that tactically and like physically happened.
Well, you're buying a rental house, based on the numbers and the market and all of those things that we buy for, population growth, all of those things. It should be secondary to you how, maybe who you're renting to. So because like I said, the short-term rental laws are all over the board. And when I say pivot, so a short-term rental is furnished. And so basically I just, instead of doing the getting bookings on Airbnb or in this case, there was a corporate site that works very similar. I had to basically pull off all the marketing and booking of short-term rental and, seek out a long-term renter who wanted a furnished property. And that's how I pivoted.
So you left it furnished and were able to
I
find
did.
long-term furnished.
I did. And then at one point, one of my long-term tenants in that property was moving, and I'm like, do you want to take all the furniture? And so I sold them the furniture so I could, because it's easier to rent when it's actually empty. So over time, you pivoted for the moment, and then over time, worked it out.
Oh, that is awesome. That's fascinating, Stephanie. Because so some of my biggest fears are this turnover and logistics thing, the change of regulation, which obviously happened to you. But I just find that's awesome. Everything you just said is so cool and so many good points. Like, you have to buy it based on the fundamentals. Like, if this is not going to work as a long-term rental, I'm not going to buy it as a short-term rental.
Yeah.
Like, you can probably make it work because the profit margins are higher on short-term rentals typically. But if worse comes to worse, as it did in this scenario, you're just like, I'll leave the furniture. It still works as a long term. I did my homework. I ran the numbers. It works as a long term. Let's keep it that way. And then when the regulations changed again, you said, cool, let's go back to short term and maximize profits. So I really appreciate that story. I think that's awesome.
And speaking of turnover, that's one of the reasons why I like short-term rentals, because turnovers on long-term rentals are expensive. You have the days, where there's not a vacancy, but B, I just literally spent $3,000 in one of my properties on a turnover because we had to paint the entire house, and you maybe can recoup some of that, but turnovers are expensive and they happen like once a year for the most part. So that's another reason I love short-term rentals.
There's something there's a word you've been using, Stephanie, I just want to highlight for a moment, and that's the word pivot. And you've mentioned it a couple times where you're like, I had to pivot, and then I did this, and I had to pivot, and I did this. And it really strikes me of the adaptability that you approached this journey of real estate investing. And I imagine we're going to hear more pivots along the way, but I just want to highlight that because it is, a lot of our clients are newer in the real estate investing world. And there's a lot of those, well, what if questions?
Right.
What if the laws change? What if I have to evict somebody? What if? And it's like, well, let's talk through those. And then maybe things don't go exactly as we planned, and we'll need to pivot. And, so I just think that's really awesome.
Yeah, that's my product development background. And in the software development space, you're releasing small pieces of code or, an application to the customer, and you're getting feedback, and you're like, okay, that's not what I thought. And then you have to change it. So it's literally like ingrained in my in my mind and my DNA.
That's awesome. And I think it's a really valuable skill. I'll call it a skill because I think it is
for sure
of those soft skills for all investors to consider developing and develop that ability to pivot and, analyze the situation as it goes along and like, okay, this is working well, this isn't, let's pivot a little bit, let's adjust.
I don't suggest people jump into everything that like I do, but I do suggest that if you're scared, which is totally reasonable, you tend to really dig into the what ifs, and you can get into like analysis paralysis. And then you just don't ever take action, and you're losing opportunity. And so helping people understand there's a cost to the fear, and, how are you going to push through to feel educated enough and feel like you could handle the what ifs so that you can move forward.
Yeah, I think someone way smarter than me. It's probably someone obvious, and everyone knows this quote. But luck is really when preparation meets opportunity.
Exactly.
And I think, that's who said that, Lisa? Do you know who said that?
Tim Robinson.
It was me, right?
Tim Robinson.
I coined it for sure. You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. No one's ever said that before. Just dropping genius quotes on everybody. No, but I think you're the prime example of that. Like in 2008, Stephanie, I'm just so fascinated by you right now. I'm sorry, I'm just going to harp on this for a while. Just in 2008, you're like, all right, cool. Got to raise these 2 kids. Everyone says don't buy houses. I'm gonna go buy 2 and just see what happens. And then I'm going to manage them myself for 6 years. So I want to say, this is a 2-part question. Why didn't you involve property management? And looking back now from where you are, would you have done it?
Oh, I have a whole spiel, on property management. I do not manage, let me say, any property ever now, and nor will I ever again. I will tell you though, the silver lining, the blessing, the legacy that those years have given me and my family are amazing. My kids, as you can imagine, they grew. That's a pivotal age, those years, and they grew up hauling them along. Hide in the back. I got to deal with this crazy guy. My son had to mow the weeds because there's no lawn at the rental property, and in the weeds are alcohol bottles. He's 11 years old and they're spurting up, and today that kid is 23 years old. He does all my investing with me, and we have a franchise business together. So if it had been smooth sailing and perfectly luxurious, I don't know that those lessons would be, that it would turn out like that.
Man,
and the memories and laughs we have, we call them the Julians. That was the street name of those 2 houses. And if the kids would be bad, I'd be like, okay, well, we're just going to move to Julian, like to scare the crap out of them. Or if they were like being entitled, I'm like, well, we could be living in Julian right now. So anyway, those houses had a lot of life lessons wrapped in them.
That's awesome.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. So take us to what happened next. I feel like we're just going to keep doing this, Lisa, and it's going to be a 14-hour long podcast because so much has happened. But all right, let's do this. Let's fast forward a little bit, Stephanie. Okay. Where are you now in terms of your real estate portfolio? And just tell us what that looks like and what your focus is for the next year or 2 on that front.
So I decided to take my capital out of Colorado and go into different states. So I researched markets and ended up moving all my capital into, it started with Kansas City and then Tennessee and Dallas-Fort Worth. So I have, I maxed out on my 10 Freddie, Fannie Mae mortgages with those out-of-state purchases. Mostly, as you can tell by those markets, I was really going after cash flow. So, and there's a variety. There's Memphis that's like uber cash flow, not zero appreciation. There's Dallas that at the time was more cash flow, but also appreciation, and Kansas City, which is like a hybrid. So my personal all by myself portfolio is in those 3 states. And then when I maxed out on Freddie and Fannie Mae, I'm like, well, now what am I going to do? I can't buy any more houses. This stinks. Do I need to get married so my spouse can buy 10 more? Or what am I going to do? So the natural thing in real estate investing scaling is you go to multiple doors. So I have several duplexes and triplexes, which is still considered residential. But I decided, I decided to learn about apartment investing. And so I learned all things apartment investing and jumped into, I was actually going to like buy my own apartment. I don't know how, I don't know, one apartment broker or whatnot, but that was my goal. I could probably brush off my annual goals, and that's what I thought I was going to do. But it's, you need a lot of money to buy an apartment by yourself. B, like you need relationships with brokers, and they need to have confidence that you know what you're doing, AKA done it before. And oh, by the way, it's not the same lending. Like they don't really care about your job or about your personal portfolio. You need to have the money in the bank, or you need to have some healthy experience. So quickly I was like, wow, okay, foiled. That plan probably isn't going to work.
Pivot, time to pivot.
Yeah, time to pivot again. And so I learned about syndication, which is basically a bunch of, average people like me coming together and jointly buying an apartment building. And we bring other regular people, investors, in to buy that apartment with us.
Can you spend a minute, and I'm sorry, Lisa, if I'm hogging all the questions because I just have so many. Can you just spend a minute for people that are listening to dive in a little bit more about the difference between the residential and commercial lending? Because that's kind of people that haven't looked at like commercial, for apartments or more than 5 units don't really understand how they're really looking at the business, the asset itself, rather than your own personal, W-2. And so just spend a couple minutes on that if you don't mind.
Sure. My dogs are going to chime in here in the background.
No problem.
If you
Dogs
don't
are
hear
welcome.
them.
They're welcome.
Yeah, they have a lot. They have a lot to say right now. So in residential lending, it's just like when you buy your personal residence, they want to see your income, either your W-2 employment income, your liabilities, and all of the same things that they look at for your personal, they look at for your rental properties, except for in rental properties, you have to show some other things, but primarily it's the same. And considered residential is any property that has 4 doors or less. So that is what goes under residential financing. Anything with 5 doors or more starts to be commercial lending, which is just like a business. You have to have good business credit. They definitely don't care about your W-2 income or anything like that. It's based on the NOI, the projection of how are you going to make money? That is a business. So you have to do a business case for the banks around, I'm going to buy this apartment, and then I'm going to, add carports or dog runs or this, and that's going to increase the value, and I'm going to increase rents to this, and your whole business case, because it's like a business, it is a business. And how at me as the banker am I going to trust that you know how to run this business so I can get my money back? So it's totally different.
And they're real concerned about what is it, debt service coverage ratio, right? And that's what they're always harping on, like 1.2 or 1.3. Yep. So they always want to make sure that you're making 20 or 30% more in NOI that's going to cover back the debt servicing, which is pretty strict. I mean, you really have to have a very profitable business, aka apartment complex, to make that happen. And another thing with that, and correct me if I'm wrong in your experience, but you almost always have to find a local lender. Right? Like if you're doing a commercial loan, like you're not gonna be able to find someone in Denver that you've used for a loan before that's gonna help you buy an apartment complex in Memphis. Like it's someone you have to build a relationship from scratch with someone in Memphis if you want to buy in Memphis.
Yeah,
and that's
brokers
super hard to
and lenders. Yeah,
brokers
it's
too,
very,
right? Like
very hard. Where when I bought when you buy properties, residential properties all over, there are lenders that are licensed to do multiple states. And so it's totally different. Yeah. So if I'm not myself and I buying an apartment, even in Colorado where I live, I don't know these lenders. They don't know me. It's not going to happen unless I partner with someone who has those relationships.
That's so interesting. That's such like a hidden world, isn't it, Lisa? It's like, I don't know. It's like a secret society almost.
Yeah. And I want to know, Stephanie, as you started to get into this world of syndication, it's one thing to say, like, so I, got into syndication, and it makes it sound so easy. However, there's so much to learn when it comes to the world of syndication. And there's managing partners and there's investing partners. And I have invested money in a syndication. That's easy. I'm just like, tell my IRA custodian, yep, send my money over there. You're doing it from and give us the language. Is it the partner side, the managing side?
There's limited partners who are the investors like you. And limited means they're limited in, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to manage. You don't have to do anything. You just get hopefully cash flow distribution checks every month or quarter. And you also are limited in liability. So, if someone gets hurt at the apartment complex and sues the place, like you are protected from that. So I would call that limited partnership in a syndication is, in my mind, the most passive real estate investing that anybody can do. Now, not including notes or whatever else might be out there, because you have a share of this apartment building and you literally do nothing. You don't have to do anything, and you get your return. Hopefully, right? Yes. If it works out like it's supposed to. So that's the limited partner side, and that's the investors. And then everybody else is on what's called the GP side, the general partnership. And that includes the property manager who's going to manage the building, the operator, we call them. Sometimes they call them a sponsor, which is the person that like finds the deal. They usually come with either the property manager or some relationships like that. But the operator is really the one that is making the business case, getting the funding. They're really the ones taking like the most risks. So that's why they get what's called an acquisition fee. People get caught up in that. Like, why did they get that? Well, because they're taking all the risk and doing all the work.
They're doing all the work.
You don't have to do anything. And then, so my role in syndicate on the general partner side of syndications is around bringing investors to, merging people that want to invest in a limited partnership to people, operators that are doing it. And there's a lot entailed in that. We are involved in due diligence. We are involved in bringing in investors, but also client relations. So every month, all of my apartments, I send out a monthly newsletter where we are with the business case, whether it be, we're at 90% vacancy, we've renovated, 50% of the units, whatever and during COVID, honestly, it was like, this is rough. Like hopefully if you're in one, you should be getting monthly updates from your GP team telling you how things are going. So that's kind of the highest of level of, how the syndication works.
How did you even begin to get started in that?
So I was out and about deciding, I'm going to buy this apartment. And I went to a apartment conference, basically. Joe Fairless, best ever real estate podcast. He was like the first daily apartment syndication podcast, and he happened to be he has an annual conference that was in Denver. I think this might like 4 or 5 years ago. And so I went there thinking, I'm going to learn everything I need to know to buy my apartment, because I still was like in delusion. And I got there, I'm like, oh my gosh, what are these people talking about? Because it was a syndication thing, which is very different. There's very different than buying your own apartment. Like when you're going down the path of buying your own apartment, you're just like a resident, you're looking at a market, and then you're building relationships, and you're like doing all these things. And I get to this and I'm like, syndication, which is not about yes, someone, operators, there is a role of someone who is doing that, but there's like 10,000 other things. So I was just like, what is this? And I did realize like, I do not know anything. I know nothing. And so there was a Joe Fairless's coach actually, who was a speaker. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to forget all these people. I'm hiring that coach because he did that. So I hired, his name's Trevor McGregor. I hired Trevor, and basically, yeah, it started with this, okay, I'm still on my apartment thing. And I'm sure he was like in his head, okay. And so like a good coach, he was like, we walked through, yeah, for several months. I was still like on this plan. And then, he, over time, it was like, what is this syndication thing? And how could I get involved? And so, started really networking with other people that were at that conference. The syndication world like travels in little packs in the real estate world. And so there's little different syndication groups kind of thing, as I don't really know how to explain it. But so I met a lot of different people in this Joe Fairless like tribe or group, and started building relationships and started partnering, and started jumping in on the GC side of things on several of those deals. So that's kind of how that started. A huge learning, lots of education, coaching, and mentoring and networking.
Love it. I love it.
That's such a journey.
Yeah. So there's so much more to talk about. And I think two things that we would love to hear, and my brain is going in a million different directions. Usually it's Tim who's saying that. Multiple streams of income, kind of getting to the core of who you are as an investor, as a person, in your perspective. We've already heard you've done a variety of things in the real estate investing world. And I'd love to just give you a chance to share about your perspective on the multiple streams of income, how you've integrated that into your life. Clearly, we've already heard some of that, but just talk to us about that philosophy and go.
Yeah. So even after jumping into syndication, I still had a goal, and I still do. I will buy an apartment with partners, right?
Nice.
And be even more involved on the GC side. But so before COVID hit, we were actually, my son and I were looking really hard at different markets, at Tampa, Kansas City, really looking at apartment deals, and really kind of went back to that. Okay, we're gonna see about doing an apartment deal. And we had a trip booked to go out to Tampa, and COVID came, and I was like, okay, pause, pivot. Here we come with a pivot, because I was like, wait a minute, this could hurt me. This could hurt, right? I've got my own personal rental properties, and I have, investors in apartment deals we're all of us that have renters when the pandemic hit didn't know how that was going to go. And so I was like, okay, let's not, obviously I couldn't even get on a plane to go to Tampa, but I was like, we're not doing that right now. And so, let's deal with what we've got. One of the foundational things with real estate investing is you must have cash reserves. So when people are like, what if this, what if that? Okay, yeah, pretend all like stuff's going to happen and you need to have cash. And so in a time like the pandemic, which who knew that we would still have an eviction, moratorium? Like,
yeah.
I mean, crazy. You need extra funds. So, AKA not a great time to like take all your monies and go buy an apartment. So, so but then I just have to buy, I just have to do stuff. I have to keep going. And you mentioned Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Robert Kiyosaki also wrote a book called The Cash Flow Quadrant. which is all about different streams of income. And there's the employee and the sole proprietor on one side, meaning just because, let's say, you're a real estate agent, that doesn't make you that's not, you're still working for your paycheck. Like so you're not building income streams. The idea of the income streams, yes, sometimes part of it can be a job where you work, but the idea is passive income, that where you aren't doing anything and that money's still coming in. And so being heavily invested in real estate, I had someone on my podcast who does franchises, who sells them. And because on Frenzied to Financial Freedom, we talk to all, not just real estate investors, all kinds of people all kinds of women, I should say, that are creating, income streams in different ways. And so this franchise consultant came on, and I was like, okay, well, I pretty much know I'm probably going to buy a franchise. Like, I was joking. If you go listen to that episode,
it's official.
I was this. Like, before we even talk, I'll just go on record. Like, I'm sure I'll want to buy one. Right. And so we're in the middle of pandemic. I'm like, I could, the Robert Kiyosaki multiple streams of income. I was like, okay, I definitely want to be diversified and build different incomes. And my 23-year-old and I work together, and so I wouldn't have to take on the heavy management. And so that's where the glimmer of like, okay, I'm gonna do this shopping for a franchise. And so there's a process, just like with real estate investing. You kind of date, but you decide your goals and things that are important to you, and then you date some different concepts and franchises, and then you decide, and you jump in, and a huge, lots of learning. And it's just like real estate investing. I would not call my early days of real estate investing passive, right? I was like running around like a fool. And my son and I have done fix and flips in the past, which also not passive. That's a job. And same with this the franchise, like starting a business is not for wussies. Like it is a job, and it is work. It will be passive once you get your team and your systems and you're going. Then just like real estate investing, like I don't do very much with my other rental properties. I check to make sure the property managers are doing their job and do certain things, but this will be the same way. So I don't let it. Somehow investors think like they're going to buy one rental and all of a sudden they're going to like be free. And, it just doesn't really work. It's not an overnight kind of success thing. It's a process and a plotting and prodding and pivoting and doing it. So the franchise world is very similar in that way.
It seems like you have done a really good job of developing that long-term mindset and vision of an investor. Talk to us a little bit about what helped you develop that. I mean, because I hear you talking about it again in this new venture with the franchise. What have you done to develop that, and what do you do to keep that when in the short term you're like, this is a little bit more than I thought?
I mean, it's a full-time job right now where I'm at in my franchise. So personal development is like core in my mind to developing your mind. Like you can't just, your mind is going to think about things whether you want it to or not, and you have to be intentional. And so I did and do a lot of, I guess, personal development work, which means reading, podcasts, books, people. I'm in mastermind groups, and like I said, coaches, and becoming really aware of what you say to yourself and how you're feeling and then managing that basically. And you have, and there's different, I have different little ways I manage it. I like, if I'm really freaked out, I'll just type just type words like this is going on and la 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 la. And I have a whole thing. Someday this franchise startup journey will like be something, because every day I'm like, oh my gosh, you have to do this and that, and construction's never ending, and all of these things. And it's the same with real estate investing and everything. When you're putting yourself out there and you're doing, big things, I guess, and different things and stuff that everyone isn't doing, you have to have people in your world that are also doing those things, so that when you're freaked out, they're like, it's okay, you've done this and that. And I go back to my own self, like, okay, you were like a sad sap divorced single mom, like you figured stuff out then. You're this much older, wiser, that you can handle this. And so doing a lot of that. And you mentioned Tanya and another woman, Vanessa and I, who met in this, in a personal development Hal Elrod mastermind. We meet every other week, and we are like, what are you doing? What, kind of hold each other accountable, and also be like, okay, like this last weekend, I'm like, okay, I am in deep with this, this, that. And you have to have people that are like, you've got it, you're fine, you're, helping you along the way to manage your mindset, because sometimes it is a full-time job.
The mindset stuff is so good.
It is so great. Stephanie, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think, so much of what you said is really powerful, but that the personal development, we often forget about that side of things when we think about stepping into this world of investing. And it really is a shift in mindset. And I've had the properties that I buy and they look fantastic. And the next thing I know, I need to redo the entire basement because there's all this water coming in, and that's going to be $20,000 in the end. And my cash flow on this really great deal of a property is gone for a decade. And it's okay, because I'm going to keep this house for multiple decades.
And because my tenant's paying the mortgage. Okay. Like I literally have to do that sometimes. I'm like, okay, wait a minute. It's not just cash flow. Okay, wait. I'm paying off this much principal, and like going through all the saving this on taxes, which is huge. So you have to like slow down and talk, remind yourself of why you're doing something. Like with this franchise, I'm like, okay, whoa, why are you doing this? Like I could do a lot of syndications as a limited partner and do no work for what I'm doing. With the franchise, it's like, okay, wait, you're building a legacy. Your kid will have 3 like real live businesses and all the real estate that they can then have options and choose what to do with, all of these things, whatever your why might be. And you just have to remind yourself of why you're doing the thing. That's why you have to like know why you're doing the thing. Is also, if any of your listeners listen to Bigger Pockets, which is, one of the biggest resources for anyone that wants to get into investing. And their target is a lot of newbie investors. And if you don't know, they've started I think it's once a week, like on Sunday or something, or maybe it's once a month, but a regularly cadenced episode just on growth mindset, having a business, being an entrepreneur. Because and it's like this with every new investor I talk to, the things that stop you are fear, self-doubt, your little people in your head saying, what are you thinking? You can't do this. And you have to work through that to even be able to ever know. Like the fundamentals of real estate investing aren't that hard, right? There's this money in, this is out, and then 5% vacancy or whatever your numbers are. They're spreadsheets. You could go on the internet and find it all. But if you're personally aren't like working on yourself of like why you are doing this thing and getting your mindset right, then you just aren't ever going to get to the actual thing. And so they started, it's such a prevalent thing with real estate investing that, they've added that to their, podcast repertoire. So
nice. And
yeah, I think it's every week on Sundays.
the other thing that I think is so powerful that you talked about in your group with Tanya and Vanessa, it struck me how you said like we meet regularly, and this is a small group where I can say, okay, guys, what am I doing? This is crazy, and maybe I made a mistake, and they can help you, and they know you. And they know, your history, and they know your goals, and they know your why. They can remind you, to have people in our lives to remind us of the why and say, hey, you got this. That is so powerful, and not in a naive, blindly optimistic way, but in a realistic way where, no, Stephanie, like it's okay. Like come back to here. Here's why you did this. You thought this through before you did it. It wasn't a blind jump off of a cliff. And that is so important, to find people in our lives who will kind of ground us, bring us back to the foundation, remind us sometimes of our own why. I think that is so powerful.
Yeah, it's also on the kind of flip side of that, also to be doing that with people that are also doing big things, right? Because, I mean, they're off doing different but amazing big things. Vanessa's a doctor and a practice, like while doing all this stuff. And so it also makes you think like, okay, you can do that. Yeah, you can, and it makes you strive too. Like every 2 weeks when you're about to meet with people like that, you're like, okay, I better have something.
What have I done?
Yeah. What did I do? So also having people in your circles that can help you, reach and keep going.
Yeah. Stephanie, I don't know if you got a chance to listen to our podcast, but
it's time for Tim's Selfish Questions.
So as I'm talking with you, I just see a lot of energy and a lot of like ideas flowing from you. And like, I feel like you're the perfect person to ask this question. I haven't asked on the podcast yet, but I really want to hear your answer. How do you not get distracted by shiny objects? Like you have so many ideas and like so many different directions you are going, and even more you can go. Like, how do you, because I really struggle with that. So I'm very curious to see like how you handle that.
It's a massive issue that I have.
It is.
I won't lie, as you can tell. And one thing is the people in your circle to hold you accountable. So what my kid who's in this franchise and all my stuff with me will be like, no. Hard no to basically anything I say. He's like, hard no. We are doing this thing. Like I will literally, yesterday I found a house that I wanted to buy as a short-term rental in Colorado Springs. And I'm like, oh my gosh, look at this. He's like, hard no. Like you can't do that right now. So that's one. The other is I literally have a list of things I think I can do right now. Because now, I'm getting ready to open my first franchise this month. And we're in pre-sale. So we have like 67 students already. Like there's a lot going on. And so I will not look or buy real estate. I will not, like there's stuff I just will not do. And even that, then I have it on my board here and I look at it every day and it makes me so sad. I'm like, I really want to do that. And it's not just real estate. I want to, my podcast, I put on pause for a period of time because I'm like, I can't do, like, that's just something that can't happen right now. And then I constantly like, well, now I'm going to write my book. And I literally spend like Saturday writing a book outline. It's like, you can't write a book right now. So it's on your not do. So I have to add it to my not do list.
Not do list. I love it.
And that's how it rolls.
Man, that's a great answer. So it's a 2-step process in general. It's your son that just doesn't let you do anything. which is
but the other
a
people, he
godsend.
is one, but yeah, and then the other
Yeah.
people too. The problem with your circle is that probably they're the same as you. So when you
Right,
bring up
exactly.
ideas, they're like, "That's so cool," because
Exactly.
that's where you do have to help your other people be like, "I know that sounds really cool, but you probably shouldn't do that right now."
Yeah, it is. It's so hard. It's something I'm always and I feel like Lisa's the same as me. I mean, she's a little bit more conservative than me, but like whenever
My husband is the hard no.
yeah, she's
Yeah.
like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Let's do it. And I'm like, wait, no, you're supposed to bring me back to reality. We can't do that right now.
Yeah.
So accountability, and I'm definitely gonna make a big fat not do list and put it right on the wall in my office
You do,
because I
yeah.
love that idea. Just
Yeah.
you can't do this right now, Tim.
And
That's
mine
great.
has like X's, circle X, like
You're going back on my
because
to-do
I
list.
try to go through it, and I'm like, I'm just gonna do a little of this.
I love it. I love it.
Just a little of my not do list. I love that. Oh man, I think that was a great selfish question and a great selfish answer, Stephanie. I appreciate you.
Awesome.
Stephanie, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And we would love to link to your podcast, even though it's on pause.
Yes,
there
yes,
are
great
many
episodes.
valuable conversations there. Your website, if you want
Sure.
us to link anything that you would like us to link for people to reach out if they're interested, if you're okay, or if that's on your not do list to have
It's
new
fine.
contacts
No,
right now.
it's fine.
We will
Yeah.
respect that.
No, it's perfect.
But
as
Stephanie, we're
we-
going to get emails about this. I'm sorry. What is your franchise? 67 students for what? I know people are going to ask.
It's called Premier Martial Arts. It's a children's martial arts franchise. And no, I'm not a martial artist. But what basically the premise is using martial arts movement to help with character development for kids. So a punch, focus, concentration, leadership. And as you can tell, I'm a that is my jam, like personal development, character building. I think there's none of it in the schools. It's hard in some families, and it just spoke to my heart. And so that's what it is.
Love it.
Super cool. So I was going to ask, I mean, we could do a whole nother episode on how you chose a franchise, but I think you just summed it up pretty well. It spoke to your heart. And that's why you chose what you chose. That's
exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What a cool program. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you.
If you had one short phrase of wisdom to throw out there here at the end, Stephanie, what is it?
I think just as people are going into new things, whether it be investing or anything else, is to just be open and just be aware and just learn as much as you can. You aren't committed just because you're learning about something. But if you don't learn and aren't open, then there's no more open doors to you. So just being open and kind of listening to that will help you find things you never knew were possible.
Awesome.
Thank
you so much, Stephanie. It has been awesome to talk with you and learn more about your journey. And thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the REI Concierge podcast. We would be honored if you would share this with a friend and take some time to leave us a review. And until next time,
happy real estate adventures.